Hey again. I know it's only been a day, but I'm tired again and I have a little bit more time to fall asleep, and I thought that maybe I could read a little bit more. How does that sound? Yeah? Alright. Let's just get right into it, shall we? Alright, so I'm gonna reread like a couple sentences from where we left off last time. But standing there, with Cora's huge house rising up behind me and that vast yard beneath, I felt so small, as if to someone looking up I'd be unrecognizable, already lost. Sorry. Back inside, I opened up the duffel that had been delivered to me at Poplar House. Jamie had brought it up from the car. It was a cheap bag, some promo my mom had gotten through work, the last thing I would have used to pack up my worldly possessions. Not that this was what was in it anyways. Instead, it was mostly clothes I never wore. The good stuff had all been on the clothesline, as well as a few textbooks, a hairbrush, and 2 packs of cotton underwear I'd never seen in my life, courtesy of the state. I tried to imagine some person I'd never met before going through my room, picking these things for me. How ballsy it was to just assume you could know with one glance the things another person could not live without. As if it was the same for everyone. That simple. There was only one thing I really needed, and I knew enough to keep it close at all times. I reached up, running my finger down the thin silver chain around my neck, until my fingers hit the familiar shape there at its center. All day long, I'd been pressing it against my chest as I traced the outline I knew by heart. The rounded top, the smooth edge on one side, the series of jagged bumps on the other. The night before, as I'd stood in the bathroom at Poplar House, it had been all that familiar. The one thing I focused on as I faced the mirror. I could not look at the dark hollows under my eyes, or the strange surroundings, and how strange I felt in them. Instead, like now, I just lifted it up gently, reassured to see that the outline of that key remained on my skin, the one that fit the door to everything I'd left behind. By the time Jamie called up the stairs that dinner was ready, I decided to leave that night. It just made sense. There was no need to contaminate their pristine home any further, or the pretty bed in my room. Once everyone was asleep, I'd just grab my stuff, slip out the back door, and be on a main road within a few minutes. The first payphone I'd found, I'd call one of my friends to come get me. I knew I couldn't stay at the yellow house. It would be the obvious place anyone would come looking. But at least if I got there, I could pick through my stuff for the things I needed. I wasn't stupid. I knew things had already changed, irrevocably and totally. But at least I could walk through the rooms and say goodbye, as well as try to leave some message behind in case anyone came looking for me. Then it was just a matter of laying low. After a few days of searching and paperwork, Cora and Jamie would write me off as unsavable, getting their brownie points for trying and escaping relatively unscathed. That was what most people wanted anyways. Now I walked into the bathroom, my hairbrush in hand. I knew I looked rough, the result of 2 pretty much sleepless nights, and then this long day, but the lighting in the bathroom, clearly designed to be flattering, made me look better than I knew I actually did, which was unsettling. Mirrors, if nothing else, were supposed to be honest. I turned off the lights and brushed my hair in the dark. Just before I left my room, I glanced at my watch, noting the time, 5:45. If Cora and Jamie were asleep by, say, midnight at the latest, that meant I only had to endure 6 hours and 15 minutes more. Knowing this gave me a sense of calm, of control, as well as the fortitude I needed to go downstairs to dinner and whatever else was waiting for me. Even with this wary attitude, however, I could never have been prepared for what I found at the bottom of the stairs. There, in the dark entryway, just before the arc that led into the kitchen, I stepped in something wet, and judging by the splash against my ankle, cold. "Whoa," I said, drawing my foot back and looking around me. Whatever the liquid was had now spread, propelled by my shoe, and I froze, so as not to send it any farther. Barely a half hour in, and already I'd managed to violate Cora's perfect palace. I was looking around me, wondering what I could possibly find to wipe it up with. The tapestry on the nearby wall? Something in the umbrella stand? When the light clicked on over my head. "Hey," Jamie said, wiping his hands on the dish towel. "I thought I heard something. Come on in, we're just about—" Suddenly he stopped talking, having spotted the puddle and my proximity to it. "Oh, shit," he said. "I'm sorry," I told him. "Quick," he said, cutting me off and tossing the dish towel. "Get it up, would you, before she—" I caught the towel and was about to bend over when I realized it was too late. Cora was now standing in the archway behind him, peering around his shoulder. "Jamie," she said, and he jumped, startled. "Is that—" "No," he said flatly. "It's not." My sister, clearly not convinced, stepped around him and walked over for a closer look. "It is," she said, turning back to look at her husband, who had slunk back farther into the kitchen. "It's pee." "It's pee again," she said, whirling round to face him. "Isn't this why we put in that dog door?" Dog, I thought, although I suppose this was a relief, considering I'd been worried I was about to find out something really disturbing about my brother-in-law. "You have a dog?" I asked. Cora sighed in response. "Mastery of a dog door takes time," Jamie told her, grabbing a roll of paper towels off a nearby counter and walking over to us. Cora stepped aside as he ripped off a few sheets, then squatted down, tossing them over the puddle and adjacent splashes. "You know that expression, you can't teach an old dog new tricks." Cora shook her head, then walked back into the kitchen without further comment. Jamie, still down on the floor, ripped off a few more paper towels and then dabbed at my shoe, glancing up at me. "Sorry about that," he said. "It's an issue." I nodded, not sure what to say to this, so I just folded the dish towel and followed him into the kitchen, where he tossed the paper towels into a stainless steel trash can. Cora was by the windows that looked out over the dock, setting the wide, white table there. I watched as she folded cloth napkins, setting one by each of the 3 plates, before laying out silverware, fork, knife, spoon. There were also placemats, water glasses, and a big glass pitcher with sliced lemons floating in it. Like the rest of the house, it looked like something out of a magazine, too perfect to even be real. Just as I thought this, I heard a loud rattling sound. It was like a noise your grandfather would make once he passed out in his recliner after dinner. But it was coming from behind me in the laundry room. When I turned around, I saw the dog. Actually, first, I saw everything else. The large bed, covered in what looked like sheepskin, the pile of toys, plastic rings, fake newspapers, rope bones, and most noticeable of all, a stuffed orange chicken sitting upright. Only once I'd processed all these accoutrements, did I actually make out the dog itself, which was small, black and white, and laying on its back, eyes closed and feet in the air, snoring loudly. "That's Roscoe," Jamie said to me as he pulled open the fridge. "Normally he'd be up and greeting you, but our dog walker came for the first time today, and I think it wore him out. In fact, that's probably why he had that accident in the foyer. He's exhausted." "What would be out of the ordinary," Cora said, "is if he actually went outside." From the laundry room, I heard Roscoe let out another loud snore. It sounded like his nasal passages were exploding. "Let's just eat," Cora said. Then she pulled out a chair and sat down. I waited for Jamie to take his place at the head of the table before claiming the other chair. It wasn't until I was seated and got a whiff of the pot of spaghetti sauce to my left that I realized I was starving. Jamie picked up Cora's plate, putting it over his own, then served her some spaghetti, sauce, and salad before passing it back to her. Then he gestured for mine and did the same before filling his own plate. It was all so formal and normal that I felt strangely nervous, so much so that I found myself watching my sister, picking up my fork only when she did, which was so weird considering how long it had been since I'd taken any cues from Cora. Still, there had been a time when she had taught me everything, so maybe, like so much else, this was just instinct. "So tomorrow," James said, his voice loud and cheerful, "we're going to get you registered for school. Cora's got a meeting, so I'll be taking you over to my old stomping ground." I glanced up. "I'm not going to Jackson?" "Out of district," Cora replied, spearing a cucumber with her fork. "And even if we got an exception, the commute is too long." "But it's mid-semester," I said. I had a flash from my locker, the bio project I'd just dropped off the week before, all of it, like my stuff in the yellow house, just abandoned. I swallowed, taking in a breath. "I can't just leave everything." "It's okay," James said. "We'll get it all settled tomorrow." "I don't mind a long bus ride," I said, ashamed at how tight my voice sounded, betraying the lump that had risen in my throat. So ridiculous that after everything that happened, I was crying about school. I can get up early. I'm used to it. "Ruby," Cora leveled her eyes at me, "this is for the pest. Perkins Day is an excellent school." "Perkins Day?" I said. "Are you serious?" "What's wrong with the day?" Jamie asked. "Everything," I told him. He looked surprised, then hurt. Great. Now I was alienating the one person who I actually had on my side in this house. "It's not a bad school," I told him. "It's just, I won't fit in with anyone there." This was a massive understatement. For the last 2 years, I'd gone to Jackson High, the biggest high school in the county. Overcrowded, underfunded, and with half your classes in trailers, just surviving a year there was considered a badge of honor, especially if you were like me and did not exactly run with the most academic of crowds. After I'd moved around so much with my mom, Jackson was the first place I'd spent consecutive years in a long time. So even if it was a total shithole, it was still familiar. Unlike Perkins Day, the elite private school known for its lacrosse team, stellar SAT scores, and the fact that the student parking lot featured more luxury automobiles than a European car dealership. The only contact we ever had with the Perkins Day kids was when they felt like slumming at parties. Even then, often, their girls stayed in the car, engine running and radio on, cigarettes dangling out the window, too good to even come inside. Just as I thought this, Jamie suddenly pushed his chair back, jumping to his feet. "Roscoe," he said, "hold on, the dog door." But it was too late. Roscoe, having at some point roused himself from his bed, was already lifting his leg against the dishwasher. I tried to get a better look at him, but only caught a fleeting glimpse before Jamie bolted across the floor, grabbing him in midstream, and then carried him, still dripping, and chucked him out the small flap at the bottom of the French doors facing us. Then he looked at Cora, and seeing her stony expression, stepped outside himself, the door falling shut with a click behind him. Cora put a hand to her head, closing her eyes, and I wondered if I should say something. Before I could, though, she pushed back her chair and walked over to pick up the roll of paper towels and disappeared behind the kitchen island, where I could hear her cleaning up what Roscoe had left behind. I knew I should probably offer to help, but sitting alone at the table, I was still bent out of shape about the idea of me at Perkins Day. Like all it would take was dropping me in a fancy house in a fancy school and somehow I'd just be fixed. The same way Cora had clearly fixed herself when she'd left me and my mom behind all those years ago. But we were not the same, not then and especially not now. I felt my stomach clench, and I reached up, pressing my fingers over the key around my neck. As I did so, I caught a glimpse of my watch, the overhead light glinting off of the face, and felt myself relax. 5 hours, 15 minutes, I thought. Then I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. 6 hours and 50 long minutes later, I was beginning to worry that my brother-in-law, the nicest guy in the world and lover of incontinent creatures, was also an insomniac. Figuring they were the early-to-bed types, I got up to my room to go to sleep at 9:30. Sure enough, I heard Cora come up about 40 minutes later, padding past my bedroom to her own, which was at the opposite end of the floor. Her light cut off at 11, at which point I started counting down, waiting for Jamie to join her. He didn't. In fact, if anything, there were more lights on downstairs now than there had been earlier, slanting across the backyard even as the houses around us went dark one by one. Now I'd been sitting there for almost 4 hours. I didn't want to turn a light on, since I was supposed to be lying asleep, so I'd spent the time lying on the bed, my hands clasped on my stomach, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell Jamie was doing. Truth be told, it wasn't that different from the nights a few weeks back when the power had been cut off temporarily at the Yellow House. At least there, though, I could smoke a bowl or drink a few beers to keep things interesting. Here, there was nothing but the dark, the heat cutting off and on at what, after timing them, I decided were random intervals, and coming up with possible explanations for the weird, shimmering light that was visible at the far end of the backyard. I was just narrowing it down to either aliens or some sort of celestial neo-suburban phenomenon when suddenly the windows downstairs went dark. Finally, Jamie was coming to bed. I sat up, brushing my hair back with my fingers, and listened. Unlike the Yellow House, which was so small and thin-walled, you could hear someone rolling over in a bed 2 rooms away. Cora's palace was hard to monitor in terms of activity and movement. Sorry. I walked over to my door, easing it open slightly. Distantly, I heard footsteps and a door opening and shutting. Perfect. He was in. Reaching down, I grabbed my bag, then slowly drew the door open, stepping out into the hallway and sticking close to the wall until I got to the stairs. Downstairs, in the foyer, I got my first lucky break in the day. The alarm wasn't set, thank God. I reached for the knob, then eased the door open, sliding my hand with the bag through first. I was just about to step over the threshold when I heard the whistling. It was cheery, and a tune I recognized, some jingle from a commercial detergent maybe. I looked around me, wondering what kind of company I would have on this subdivision street at 1:30 in the morning. Soon enough, I got an answer. Good boy, Roscoe, good boy. I froze. It was Jamie. Now I could see him coming up the other side of the street with Roscoe, who had just lifted his leg on a mailbox, walking in front of him on a leash. Shit, I thought, wondering whether he was far enough away not to see if I bolted in the opposite direction, dodging the streetlights. After a quick calculation, I decided to go around the house instead. I could hear him whistling again as I vaulted off the front steps, then ran through the grass, dodging a sprinkler spigot and heading for the backyard. There, I headed for that light I'd been studying earlier, now hoping that it was aliens or some kind of black hole, anything to get me away. Instead, I found a fence. I tossed my bag over and was wondering what my chances were of following, not to mention what I'd find there, when I heard a thwacking noise from behind me. When I turned around, I saw Roscoe emerging from his dog door. At first, he was just sniffing the patio, his nose low to the ground, going in circles. Then he suddenly stopped, his nose in the air. Uh-oh, I thought. I was already reaching up, grabbing the top of the fence, and scrambling to try and pull myself over, when he started yapping and shot like a bullet right towards me. Say what you will about little dogs, but they can move. In mere seconds, he'd covered the huge yard between us and was at my feet, barking up at me as I dangled from the fence, my triceps and biceps already burning. Shh! I hissed at him, but of course this only made him bark more. Behind us, in the house, the light came on, and I could see Jamie in the kitchen window looking out. I tried to pull myself up farther, working to get more leverage. I managed to get one elbow over, hoisting myself up enough to see that the source of the light I'd been watching was not otherworldly at all, but a swimming pool. It It was big and lit up, and I noticed occupied, a figure cutting through the water doing laps. Meanwhile, Roscoe was still yapping, and my bag was already in the strange person's yard, meaning I had little choice but to join it or risk being busted by Jamie. Straining, I pulled myself up so I was hanging over the fence and tried to throw a leg to the other side. No luck. "Roscoe?" I heard Jamie call from the patio. "What you got there, boy?" I turned my head, looking back at him, wondering if he could see me. I figured I had about 5 seconds if Roscoe didn't shut up before he headed out to see what his dog had treed or fenced. Another 15 while he crossed the yard, then maybe a full minute before I'd put it all together. "Hello?" I was so busy doing all these calculations that I hadn't noticed that the person who'd been swimming laps had, at some point, stopped. Not only that, but he was now at the edge of the pool, looking up at me. It was hard to make out his features, but whoever it was clearly male and sounded awfully friendly considering the circumstances. "Hi," I muttered back. "Roscoe?" Jamie called out again, and this time, without even turning around, I could hear he was moving, coming closer. Unless I had a burst of superhuman strength or a black hole opened up and swallowed me whole, I needed a plan B, and fast. "Do you," the guy in the pool said, raising his voice to be heard over Roscoe, who was still barking. "No," I told him as I relaxed my grip. His face disappeared as I slid down my side of the fence, landing on my feet with mere seconds to spare before Jamie ducked under the small row of trees on the edge of the yard and saw me. "Ruby?" he said. "What are you doing out here?" He looked so concerned that for a moment I actually felt a pang of guilt, like I'd let him down or something, which was just ridiculous. We didn't even know each other. "Nothing," I said. "Is everything okay?" He looked up at the fence, then back at me, as Roscoe, who'd finally shut up, sniffed around his feet, making snorting noises. "Yeah," I said. I was making it a point to sleep slowly, calmly. Tone was everything. I was just... Truth was, at that moment, I didn't know what I was planning to say. I was just hoping for some plausible excuse to pop out of my mouth, which, considering my luck so far, was admittedly kind of a long shot. Still, I was going to go for it. But before I could even open my mouth, there was a thunk from the other side of the fence, and a face appeared above us. It was the guy from the pool, who, in the spider light, I could now see was about my age. His hair was blonde and wet, and there was a towel around his neck. "Jamie!" he said. "Hey, what's up?" Jamie looked at him. "Hey," he replied. To me said, "So, you met Nate?" I shot a glance at the guy. "Oh well," I thought. "It's better than what I had planned." "Yeah," I nodded. "I was just..." "She came to tell me my music was too loud," the guy, Nate, told Jamie. Unlike me, he didn't seem to be straining in the least, holding himself over the top of the fence. I wondered if he was standing on something. To me, he added, "Sorry about that. I crank it up so I can hear it under the water." "Right," I said. I couldn't sleep." At my feet, Roscoe suddenly coughed, hacking up something. We all looked at him, and then Jamie said slowly, "Well, it's late. We've got an early day tomorrow, so... Yeah, I should get to bed, too," Nate said, reaching down to pull up one edge of his towel and wiping it across his face. He had to be out on a deck chair or something, I thought. No one had that kind of upper body strength. "Nice meeting you, Ruby." "You too," I replied. He waved to Jamie, then dropped out of sight. Jamie looked at me for a moment, as if still trying to decipher what had happened. I tried not to flinch as he continued to study my face, only relaxing once he slid his hands in his pockets and started across the lawn, Roscoe tagging along his heels. I had just reached the line of trees, following him, when I heard a psst from behind me. When I turned around, Nate had pushed open part of the fence and was passing my bag through. "Might need this," he said. Like I was supposed to be grateful. Unbelievable. I thought as I walked over, picking up the bag. "So what's it to?" I glanced up at him. He had his hand on the gate and pulled a dark-colored t-shirt, and his hair was starting to dry now, sticking up slightly. In the flickering light from the nearby pool, I could finally make out his face enough to see that he was kinda cute, but in a rich boy way, all jockey and smooth edges, not my type at all. "What?" I said. "The key." He pointed to my neck. "What's it do?" Jamie was going into the house now, leaving the door open for me behind him. I reached up, twining my fingers around the chain hanging there. "Nothing," I told him. I shifted my bag behind me, keeping it in my shadow as I headed across the lawn to the back door. So close, I thought. A shorter fence, a fatter dog, and everything would be different. But that wasn't always the way. It's never something huge that changes everything, but instead the tiniest of details. A rock of irrevocably tweaking the balance of the universe while you're busy focusing on the big picture. When I got to the house, there was no sign of Jamie or Roscoe. Still, I figured it wasn't worth bringing my bag inside. Since the balcony was too high to toss it up, I decided to just stow it someplace and come back down for it in a couple hours when the coast was clear. So I stuck it beside the grill, then slipped inside just as the shimmering lights from Nate's pool cut off, leaving everything dark between his house and ours. I didn't see Jamie again as I climbed the stairs to my room. If I had, I wasn't sure what I would have said to him. Maybe he had fallen for my flimsy excuse, aided and abetted by a pool boy who happened to be in the right place at what, for me anyway, turned out to be the wrong time. It was possible he was just that gullible. Unlike my sister, who knew from disappearing and could spot a lie, even a good one, a mile off. She also probably would have happily provided the boost I needed up and over that fence, or at least pointed the way to the gate, if only be rid of me once and for all. I waited a full hour to slip back downstairs. When I eased open my door, though, there was my bag, sitting right there at my feet. It seemed impossible I hadn't heard Jamie leave it there, but he had. For some reason, seeing it made me feel the worst I had all day, ashamed in a way I couldn't even explain as I reached down, pulling it inside with me. Alright, so that was the end of chapter 1. I really wanted to finish it last night, but it was like we'd been reading for half an hour, and I really need to get to sleep. I have more time tonight, since I started earlier, and I don't have to get up quite as early, so we're going to start chapter 2, and let's see, it looks like it's a lot of pages. Like just flipping through. We are currently on page 32, and chapter 3 starts on page 63. So it's a little bit more than what we've read already. So I probably won't read for another hour, but I'll read some more. Maybe get halfway through, maybe a quarter. We'll see how it goes. This is a very illuminating experience for me, you know? It's like I don't realize how much I stutter until I have to do it like this. Anyways, chapter 2. My mom hated to work. Far from a model employee, she had never had a job, at least in my recollection, that she actually enjoyed. Instead, in our house, work was a 4-letter word, the official end of good times, something to be dreaded and bitched about and, whenever possible, avoided. Things might have been different if she was qualified for a glamorous occupation like travel agent or fashion designer. Instead, due to choices she'd made, as well as a few circumstances beyond her control, she'd always have low-level, minimum wage, benefits only if you're really lucky kind of jobs. Waitress, retail, telemarketer, temp. Which was why, when she got hired on a commercial courier, it seemed like such a good thing. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but at least it was different. Commercial Courier always called itself an all-purpose delivery service, but their primary business came from lost luggage. They had a small office at the airport where bags that had been routed to the wrong city or put onto the wrong plane would eventually end up, at which point one of their couriers would deliver them to their proper destination, whether it be a hotel or the bag's owner's house. Before a commercial, Mom had been working as a receptionist in an insurance office, a job she hated because it required the two things she hated above all else: getting up early and dealing with people. When her bosses let her go after 6 months, she'd spent a couple of weeks sleeping in and grumbling before finally hauling out the classifieds, where she spotted the ad for commercial. "Delivery drivers needed," it said. "Work independently, days or nights." She never would have called any job perfect, but just at a glance it seemed pretty close. So she called and set up an interview. 2 days later, she had a job. Or we did. The truth was, my mom was not a very good navigator. I'd suspected she was slightly dyslexic, as she was always mixing up her right and left, something that definitely would have been a problem for a job that relied almost entirely on following written driving directions. Luckily, though, her shift didn't start till 5 p.m., which meant that I could ride along with her, an arrangement that I assumed at first would only last for the initial few days, till she got the hang of things. Instead, we became co-workers, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, just her, me, and the banged-up Subaru, reuniting people with their possessions. Our night always started at the airport. Once the bags were stacked and packed in the car, she'd hand over the sheet of addresses and directions, and we'd set off, hitting the nearby hotels first before venturing farther to the neighborhoods and individual homes. People had one of two reactions when we arrived with their lost luggage. Either they were really happy and grateful, or chose to literally blame the messenger, taking out their ire at the entire airline industry on us. The best tactic, we learned, was empathy. "Don't I know it," my mom would say, holding her clipboard for the person's signatures. They ranted on about having to buy new toiletries or clothes in a strange city. "It's an outrage." Usually this was enough, since it was often more than the airlines had offered up, but occasionally someone would go above and beyond, being a total asshole, at which point my mom would just drop the bag at their feet, turn and walk back to the car, ignoring whatever they shouted after her. "It's karma," she'd say to me as we pulled away. "Watch. I bet we're back here again before we know it." Hotels were better, because we only had to deal with the bellman or front desk staff. They'd offer us some kind of perk for fitting them in early on our route, and we became regulars at all of the hotel bars, grabbing a quick burger between deliveries. By the end of our shift, the highway had usually cleared, and we were often the only car cresting silent hills in dark subdivisions. That late, people often didn't want to be bothered by us ringing the bell, so they'd leave a note on the front door asking us to drop the bag on the porch, or tell us when we called to confirm the delivery, to just pop the trunk of the car and leave it in there. These were always the weirdest trips for me, when it was midnight or even later, and we pulled up to a dark house trying to be quiet, like a robbery in reverse, creeping around to leave something rather than take it. Still, there was also something reassuring about working for a commercial, almost hopeful, like things that were lost could be found again. As we drove away, I always tried to imagine what it would be like to open your door to find something you had given up on. Maybe you'd seen places you never had, been rerouted and passed through so many strange hands, but still somehow found its way back to you, all before the day even began. I'd expected to sleep the same way I had at Poplar House, barely and badly, but instead woke with a start the next morning when Jamie knocked on my door, saying we'd be leaving in an hour. I'd been so out of it that at first I wasn't even sure where I was. Once I made out the skylight over my head, though, with its little Venetian blind, it all came back to me. Cora's, my near escape, and now Perkins' day. Just 3 days earlier, I'd been managing as best as I could at the Yellow House, working for a commercial and going to Jackson. Now, here, everything had changed again. But I was kind of getting used to that now. When my mom first took off, I didn't think it was for good. I figured she was just out on one of her escapades, which usually lasted only as long as it took her to run out of money or welcome, a few days at most. The first couple times she'd done this, I'd been so worried, then overwhelmingly relieved when she returned, peppering her with questions about where she'd been, which irritated her to no end. "I just need some space, okay?" she'd tell me, annoyed, before stalking off to her room to sleep, something that, by the looks of it, she hadn't done much of during the time she'd been gone. It took me another couple of her disappearances, each a few days longer than the last, before I realized that they were exactly how I shouldn't react, making a big deal out of it. Instead, I adopted a more blasé attitude. Blasé, blase. I think it's blasé. We're going with that. Sounds French. Like I hadn't even really noticed she'd been gone. My mother had always been about independence. Hers, mine, and ours. She was a lot of things, but clingy had never been one of them. By taking off, I decided she was teaching me about taking care of myself. Only a weak person needed someone else around all the time. With every disappearance, she was proving herself stronger. It was up to me and how I behaved to do the same. After 2 weeks with no word from her, though, I'd finally forced myself to go into her room and look through her stuff. Sure enough, her emergency stash, $300 in cash, lest I'd check, was gone, as were her saving bond certificates, her makeup, and most telling, her bathing suit and favorite summer robe. Wherever she was headed, it was warm. I had no idea when she'd really left, since we hadn't exactly been getting along. We hadn't exactly not been, either, but that fall, the hands-off approach we'd both cultivated had spilled over from just a few days here and there to all the time. Also, she'd stopped going to work, sleeping when I left for school in the morning, sleeping when I returned and headed out to commercial, and usually out once I returned after all the deliveries were done. So it wasn't like we had a lot of chances to talk. Plus, the rare occasion she was home and awake, she wasn't alone. Most times, when I saw her boyfriend Warner's beat-up old Cadillac in the driveway, I'd park and then walk around to my bedroom window, which I kept unlocked, and let myself in that way. It meant I had to brush my teeth with bottled water and made washing my face out of the question, but these were small prices to pay to avoid Warner, who filled the house with pipe smoke and always seemed to be sweating out whatever he'd drunk the day before. He'd park himself on the couch, beer in hand, his eyes silently following me whenever I did have to cross in front of him. He'd never done anything I could point to specifically, but I believe this was due not to innocence, but to lack of opportunity. I did not intend to provide him with one. My mother, however, loved Warner, or so she said. They'd met at Holleran's, the small bar just down the street from the yellow house where she went sometimes to drink beer and sing karaoke. Unlike my mother's other boyfriends, Warner wasn't the meaty, rough-around-the-edges type. Instead, in his standard outfit of dark pants, cheap shirt, deck shoes, hat with captain's insignia, he looked just like he'd stepped off a boat, albeit not necessarily a nice one. I wasn't sure whether he had a nautical past and was pining for it, or was hoping for one still ahead. Either way, he liked to drink, and seemed to have some money from somewhere, so for my mom, he was perfect. These days, when I thought about my mom, I sometimes pictured her on the water. Maybe she and Warner had gotten that old Cadillac all the way to Florida, like they'd always talked about doing, and were now on the deck of some boat bobbing on the open sea. This was at least a prettier picture than the one I actually suspected, the little bit of denial I allowed myself. It wasn't like I had a lot of time for fantasies anyway. When she left, it was mid-August, and I still had 9 months before I turned 18 and could live alone legally. I knew I had a challenge ahead of me, but I was a smart girl, and I thought I could handle it. My plan was to keep the job at commercial until Robert, the owner, caught on to my mom's absence, at which point I had to find something else. As far as the bills went, because our names were identical, I could access my mom's account for whatever paychecks, which were direct deposited, I was able to earn. I figured I was good, at least for the time being. As long as I kept out of trouble at school, the one thing that I knew for sure would blow my cover No one had yet to know anything was different. Alright, I'm not quite done, but my throat's really hurting. So, I think I'm gonna read a couple more paragraphs, then call it a day, alright? And who knew? It could even have worked out if the dryer hadn't broken. But while my short-term plans might have changed, the long-term goal remained the same as it had been for as long as I could remember, to be free. No longer dependent or a-dependent, subject to the whim or whimsy of my mother, the system, or anyone else. The albatross always weighing down on someone's neck. It didn't really matter whether I served out the time at the Yellow House or in Cora's world. Once I turned 18, I could cut myself off from everyone and finally get what I wanted, which was to be on my own once and for all. Now I did the best I could with my appearance, considering I was stuck with the same pair of jeans I'd had on for 2 days and a sweater I hadn't worn in years. Still, I thought, tugging down the hem of the sweater, which was about 2 sizes too small. It wasn't like I cared about impressing the people at Perkins Day. Even my best stuff would be their worst. I grabbed my backpack off the bed and then started down the hall. Cora and Jamie's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and as I got closer, I could hear a soft, tinny beeping, too quiet to be an alarm clock, but similar in sound and tone. As I passed, I glanced inside and saw my sister lying on her back, a thermometer poking out of her mouth. After a moment, she pulled it out, squinting at it as the beeping stopped. I wondered if she was sick. Cora had always been like the canary in the coal mine, the first to catch anything. My mother said this was because she worried too much, that anxiety affected the immune system. She herself claimed hadn't had a cold in 15 years, although I ventured to think this was because her own system was pickled rather than calm. At any rate, my memories of growing up with Cora were always colored with her various ailments, ear infections, allergies, tonsillitis, unexplained rashes, and fevers. If my mother was right and it was stress-related, I was sure I could blame myself for this latest malady, whatever it was. Down in the kitchen, I found Jamie sitting at an island, a laptop open in front of him, a cell phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, he smiled, then covered it with one hand. "Hey," he said, "I'll be off in a sec. There's cereal and stuff on the table. Help yourself." I glanced over, expecting to see a single box and some milk. Instead, there were several different boxes, most of them unopened, as well as a plate of muffins, a pitcher of orange juice, and a big glass bowl of fruit salad. "Coffee?" I asked, and he nodded, gesturing towards the opposite counter, where I saw a pot, some mugs laid out in front of it. "Yeah, but that's just the point," Jamie was saying as he cocked his head to one side, typing something on a keyboard. "If we're serious about considering this offer, we need to at least set some parameters for the negotiations. It's important." I walked over to the coffee pot, picking up a mug and filling it. On Jamie's laptop, I could see the familiar front page of YouMe.com, the networking site that it seemed like everyone from your favorite band to your grandmother had gotten on in the last year or so. I had a page myself, although due to the fact that I didn't have regular access to a computer I hadn't checked in a while. "But that's just the point," Jamie said, clicking on to another page. "They say they want to preserve the integrity and the basic intention, but they've got corporate mindsets. Look, just talk to Glenn and see what he says." "No, not this morning. I've got something going. I'll be in by noon, though." "Okay, later." Then there was a beep, and he put down the phone, picking at a muffin from beside him and taking a bite, just as there was a ping on the screen, the familiar sound of a new message in the Yumi inbox. "You have a Yumi page?" I asked him as I sat down the table with my coffee. My sweater rode up again, and I gave another tug. He looked at me for a second. Yeah, I do." He nodded at my bug. At my mug. "You're not eating?" "I don't like breakfast," I told him. "That's crazy talk." He pushed back his chair, walking over to grab 2 bowls out of a nearby cabinet, and stopped at the fridge, pulling it open and getting out some milk. "When I was a kid," he said, coming over and plopping everything onto the table beside me, My mom fixed us eggs or pancakes every morning, with sausage or bacon, and toast. You gotta have it. Brain food. I looked at him over my coffee cup as he grabbed one of the cereal boxes, ripping it open and filling a bowl. Then he added milk, filling it practically to the top, and plopped on a plate before adding a muffin and a heaping serving of fruit salad. I was about to say something about being impressed with his appetite when he pushed the whole thing across to me. "Oh no," I said, "I can't." "You don't have to eat it all," he said, shaking cereal into his own bowl. "Just some. You'll need it. Trust me." I shot him a wary look, then put down my mug, picking up the spoon and taking a bite. Across the table, his own mouth filled him up, and he grinned at me. "Good, right?" I nodded, just as there was another ping from the laptop, followed immediately by one more. Jamie didn't seem to notice, instead spearing a piece of pineapple with his fork. "So," he said, "big day today." "I guess," I said, taking another bite of cereal. I hated to admit it, but now I was starving and had to work not to shovel the food in nonstop. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had breakfast. "I know a new school is tough," he told me, as there were 3 more pings in quick succession. God, he was popular. My dad was in the military. 8 schools in 12 years. It sucked. I was always the new kid. "So how long did you go to Perkins Day?" I asked, figuring maybe a short stint would explain him actually liking it. Ping! Ping! "I started as a junior. Best 2 years of my life." "Really?" He raised an eyebrow at me, picking up a glass and helping himself to some orange juice. "You know," he said, "I understand it's not what you're used to, but it's also not as bad as you think." I withheld comment as 4 more messages his page, followed by a thwacking noise behind me. I turned around just in time to see Roscoe wiggling through the dog door. "Hey, buddy," Jamie said to him as he trotted past us to his water bowl. "How's the outside world?" Roscoe's only response was a prolonged period of slurping, his tags banging against the bowl. Now that I finally had a real chance to study him, I saw he was kind of cute if you liked little dogs, which I did not. He had to be under 20 pounds, and he was stocky, black with a white belly and feet, his ears poking straight up. Plus he was one of those pug noses all smushed up, which I suppose explained the adenoidal sounds I'd already come to see as his trademark. Once he was done drinking, he burped, then headed towards us, stopping en route to lick up some stray muffin crumbs. As I watched Roscoe, Jamie's laptop kept pinging. He had to have gotten at least 20 messages in the last 5 minutes. "Should you check that or something?" "Check what?" "Your page," I said, nodding to the laptop. "You keep getting messages." "Nah, I can wait." His face suddenly brightened. "Hey, sleepyhead, you're running late." Somebody kept hitting the snooze bar. My sister grumbled as she came in, hair wet and dressed in black pants and a white blouse, her feet bare. "The same somebody," Jamie said, getting to his feet and meeting her at the island, "who is down here a full half-hour ahead of you." Cora rolled her eyes, kissing him on the cheek and pouring herself a cup of coffee. Then she bent down, mugging her hand to pet Roscoe, who was circling her feet. "You guys should get going," she said. "There'll be traffic." "Back roads," Jamie said confidently as I pushed back my chair, tucking down my sweater again before carrying my now empty bowl and plate to the sink. "I used to be able to get to the day in 10 minutes flat, including any necessary stoplights." "That was 10 years ago," Cora told him. "Times have changed." "Not that much," he said. His laptop pinged again, but Cora, like him, didn't seem to notice. Instead, she was watching me as I bent down, sliding my plate into the dishwasher. "Do you—" she said, then stopped. When I glanced up at her, she said, "Maybe you should borrow something of mine to wear." "I'm fine," I said. She bit her lip, looking right at the strip of exposed stomach between the hem of my sweater and the buckle on the jeans I'd been trying to cover all morning. "Just come on," she said. We climbed the stairs silently, her leading the way up and into her room, which was enormous, the walls a pale, cool blue. I was not surprised to see that it was neat as a pin, the bed made with pillows arranged so precisely you just knew there was a diagram in a nearby drawer somewhere. Like my room, There were also lots of windows and a skylight, as well as a much bigger balcony that led down to a series of decks below. Cora crossed the room, taking a sip from the mug in her hands as she headed into the bathroom. We went past a shower, double sinks, and sunken bath into a room beyond, which turned out not to be a room at all, but a closet. A huge closet, with racks of clothes on two walls and floor-to-ceiling shelves on the other. From what I could tell, Jamie's things, jeans, a couple of shirts, and lots of t-shirts, a couple of suits, and lots of t-shirts and sneakers took up a fraction of the space. The rest was all Cora's. I watched from the doorway as she walked over to one rack, pushing some stuff aside. "You probably need a shirt and a sweater, right?" she said, studying a few cardigans. "You have a jacket, I'm assuming." Cora. She pulled out a sweater, examining it. "Yes? Why am I here?" Maybe it was the confined space, or this extended period without Jamie to buffer us. But whatever the reason, this question had just somehow emerged, as unexpected to me as I knew it was to her. Now that it was out, though, I was surprised how much I wanted to hear the answer. She dropped her hand from the rack, then turned to face me. "Because you're a minor," she said, "and your mother abandoned you." "I'm almost 18, I told her, "and I was doing just fine on my own." "Fine," she repeated, her expression flat. Looking at her, I was reminded how really different we were. Me, a redhead with pale, freckled skin, such a contrast to her black hair and blue eyes. I was taller, with my mother's thin frame, while she was a couple inches shorter and curvier. "You call that fine?" "You don't know," I said. "You weren't there." "I know what I read in the report," she replied. "I know what the social worker told me." "Are you saying those accounts were inaccurate?" "Yes," I said. "So you weren't living without heat or water in a filthy house?" "Nope." She narrowed her eyes at me. "Where's Mom, Ruby?" I swallowed then, turned my head as I reached up, pressing the key on my neck into my skin. "I don't care," I said. "Neither do I," she replied. "But the fact of the matter is she's gone and you can't be by yourself. Does that answer your question?" I didn't say anything, and she turned back to the clothes, pushing through them. "I told you I don't need to borrow anything," I said. My voice sounded high and tight. "Ruby, come on," she said, sounding tired. She pulled a black sweater off a hanger, tossing it over her shoulder, before moving over to another shelf and grabbing a green t-shirt. Then she walked over, pushing them both at me as she passed. "And hurry, it takes at least 15 minutes to get there." Then she walked back through the bathroom, leaving me behind. For a moment I just stood there, taking in the neat rows of clothes, how her shirts were all folded just so, stacked by color. As I looked down at the clothes she'd given me, I told myself I didn't care what the people at Perkins Day thought about me or my stupid sweater. Everything was just temporary anyways, me being there or here, or anywhere for that matter. A moment later, though, when Jamie yelled up that it was time to go, I suddenly found myself pulling on Cora's t-shirt, which was clearly expensive and fit me perfectly, and then her sweater, soft and warm, over it. On my way downstairs, in clothes that weren't mine, to go to a school I'd never claim, I stopped and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. You couldn't see the key around my neck. It hung too low under both collars. But if I leaned in close, I could make it out, buried deep beneath. Out of sight, hard to recognize, but still able to be found, even if I was the only one to ever look for it. Alright, we're not at the end of the chapter. I'd say we're a little more than halfway there. But, we're at one of those points where there's 3, asterisks between paragraphs. So, I think that's a good stopping point, especially because my voice is about to die if I keep talking. So, thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you're able to fall asleep a little bit better now. Alright, see you soon.